I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, a number of large international concerns relating to issues of terrorism, world stability, and war and peace. Here at home in the United States Congress, President Obama's Iran nuclear accord has withstood assault from those Americans who believe it is not strong enough as a deterrent to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. While in Europe, a sudden mass migration of millions of refugees fleeing war-torn Syria and Iraq are flooding across borders, posing ethical dilemmas for some and threatening to create havoc in many lands. Both of these issues have meaning way beyond the Jewish community, but they each do touch upon Jewish concerns and pose serious questions for American Jews to contemplate. So we thought we would ask one of America's foremost Middle East analysts, who has a most impressive background in international policy. He served for 24 years in the United States State Department, serving 6 secretaries of state, both Democrat and Republican. And he helped broker agreements between Israel, Jordan, Syria, and the Palestinians. He's the author of 5 books, including The End of Greatness, Why America Can't Have and Doesn't Want Another Great President. And I always find him to be one of the most perceptive and insightful analysts on the American scene today. It's a pleasure to welcome back to JBS Aaron David Miller, who's currently Vice President for New Initiatives at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us again, and Shana Tova.
Same to you, and it's always a pleasure to be on your show.
Thank you, my friend. So look, Aaron, now that the Iran nuclear accord is a fact of American diplomacy, what's your sense of it? How, on the one hand, how wonderful is it, or how much of a disaster is it from your perspective?
You know, I'm a Rolling Stones fan, and one of Mick Jagger's better songs was one that he recorded with Keith Richards in 1971, and the gist of it was, according to Mick Jagger, that sometimes in life you can't always get what you want, but you might find you get what you need.
Uh-huh.
That is my description of the Iran deal. The president got what he needed: slower, smaller, perhaps more easily verifiable Iranian nuclear program for a discrete period of time. The Iranians, however, got what they wanted, which was access to billions of dollars of sanctions relief once they commit and implement their undertakings under the deal. They got legitimacy for a sizable nuclear program, and 10 to 12 years from now, as some of these provisions go into sunset, they will still have the option, should they choose to exercise it, of proceeding toward breakout. So again, need, yeah. I mean, we're going to avoid a preemptive military strike by the Israelis. The Americans will not have to use military force. The coalition will have been kept together. Probably we will succeed in decelerating Iran's nuclear weapons aspirations for a period of time. But on balance, in my judgment, and I'm not a cheerleader for this agreement for sure, nor am I an ideological hardcore opponent of it.
Yes.
The president got what he needed. The Iranians got what they wanted.
By the way you say it, it sounds like it's better to get what one wants than what one needs.
Well, there's no question about that.
Mm-hmm.
The real issue is this: why was Iran interested in a putative nuclear weapons capacity? That's a critically important question. Was it to have a nuclear weapon to attack the state of Israel? In my judgment, that's certainly not the primary Iranian motivation. I live in Chevy Chase, Maryland. I don't live in Israel, so I'm not going to trivialize Israeli security concerns in that regard. But the Iranians want a weapon, or at least they want to be 6 months, a year away from actually producing one, because it's a hedge against regime change. It's a way to demonstrate that they are a regional superpower. And it's a way to demonstrate to the Sunni Arabs and to the United States that you want to mess around with Iran, start messing. But there could be a price that has to be paid. So my bottom line on this is very clear. Unless during the next decade the character of the Iranian regime changes, it becomes a less repressive, less authoritarian, less ideological regime, and its visions for the Middle East, which are at odds with America's, not to mention Israel's, unless those are tempered, what we have done is merely delay up the problem, because you cannot separate Iran's desire to remain months away from producing enough fissile material to manufacture a single nuclear weapon from the nature of the regime, the way it looks at the world, and the way it sees itself in the regions. They are inextricably linked, and that is why moderation, evolution of Iranian attitudes are critically important, in my judgment, to the overall success of this deal. And frankly, I don't believe in transformations. You look at the former Soviet Union, you look at China, you look at Vietnam. These are regimes who are ideological and have managed to open up economically, but maintain tight authoritarian control. So I'm from Ohio, not Missouri, but Missouri is the show-me state. So you show me an evolution in Iranian attitudes 5 years from now, 6 years from now, 7 years from now, and I'll be a little more upbeat about what has been accomplished. But when the president says, no matter what happens with Iran ideologically, we're better off without Iran having a weapon. He's 100% right. But don't try to sell me on the notion that what this deal has done is to comprehensively solve the problem of Iran's weapons aspirations. This is an arms control agreement. And it lasts for a discrete period of time. Let's not break open the champagne bottle quite yet.
Okay. You know, Aaron, I told the audience a moment ago, I gave them a sense of your background. And one day, I'm still hoping, either in Washington or here in our own studios, you just sit with me for an hour and we just reminisce about some of the places and experiences you've had negotiating involving Israel and some of Israel's Arab neighbors. But
Love
my
to
point,
do that. Love to do that.
Okay. That's very kind of you. I'm going to take you up on it. But Aaron, you have been at the heart. You have been in the innermost circles of some of the most sensitive, intense negotiations. What we hear, and Aaron, what do I know, and what do I believe the people I see on American television? I'm not talking about media types. We don't know anything. Americans know nothing. But what we're told is the negotiations weren't run very well from the American perspective because there wasn't an understanding of the Iranian, Islamic, Arab-tinged mentality of the bazaar. And the bazaar has a certain kind of give and take where the only way you ever win is if you're ready to walk away. And I don't know whether this puts you in an impossible position by my asking the question, but I want to ask it anyway. Do you have any sense that you're willing to say publicly the extent to which you think these negotiations were done well, or you wish they were done significantly better from the American side?
Well, you know, every negotiation involves a balance of interest. I mean, frankly, good marriages, good business propositions, good friendships all involve a balance of interest. If there's a fundamental asymmetry of power, and one side to a negotiation or a marriage or a friendship or a business deal basically trumps the other, then it's really no longer a sustainable relationship or terribly productive. So in any negotiation, you're going to have a certain amount of give and take. I think the question, though, is one that hinges upon a set of conditions that, frankly, didn't exist during the course of the negotiation. Someone asked me the other day on Syria, and I had a piece in my foreignpolicy.com article this week, was it's not Obama's fault. It was an effort to address those critics who argue that everything that we see in Syria, the tragedy of the migrants, the killings, the chemical weapons, the rise of ISIS, it's all Obama's fault. Look, the reality is, and it pertains to in my judgment, to the Iran negotiations as well. You give me a different kind of president, You give me a different set of circumstances, that is to say, America is not emerging from the two longest wars and unprofitable wars, among the the longest, but among the most unprofitable, where the standard for victory was never could we win, but when could we leave. You give me different coalition allies, and you give me different adversaries. And you could probably have changed the negotiating frame. But you didn't have that. You had a very risk-averse president who was very wary of creating a set of circumstances where you'd end up with military action by the Israelis, or in his view, worse, by the United States. And I think he came to the conclusion that military action, frankly, wouldn't produce an end state. Yeah, you could set back the Iranian program for 2 or 3 years. But then what? Then wouldn't you provide the Iranians with the justification they need this time to pursue a weapon, probably with the support of some of actors in the international community? I mean, so you didn't have the man, you didn't have the circumstances, you didn't have the allies you needed to produce the kind of deal that, in my judgment, many Israelis and many critics of the president thought he could produce. Mm-hmm. I mean, you give me a George H.W. Bush and a Jim Baker, okay? You give me a set of circumstances in which the U.S. is admired, feared, and respected in the Middle East. You give me a different set of allies. Remember, the Chinese and the Russians were not on the same page. They are much less allergic to Iran's nuclear program and much more eager to do business with the Iranians. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think the question, in my judgment, and it's arguable because there are those people, and I deal with them every day in Washington, who fundamentally believe, Mark, as you said it, that the president wasn't tough enough, wasn't devious enough. I've used this line many times, that we're playing checkers in the Middle East while everyone else seems to be playing three-dimensional chess. Mm-hmm. That I believe, however. But don't give the president a test he couldn't possibly pass. Mm-hmm. And given the risk aversion of the U.S. Congress, which, frankly, if it came to a vote, during the Red Line episode, remember that one when the president basically walked away?
Yeah.
I was told that calls to congressional offices were running 10-1 against taking military action in Syria. You have a very risk-averse public. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants a military confrontation that will drive oil prices up, drive the stock market down, and create more instability. It wasn't the kind of moment that, in my judgment, would have been required. Nor did we have the kind of negotiators, nor were we respected and feared enough to produce the kind of agreement that the president's critics hoped.
Very interesting, Aaron. During the high holidays, I had the pleasure of speaking with a member of the court who was in attendance, and he watches JBS, and he said he disagreed with me on my stand on the Iran deal. I said, I didn't know I'd taken a stand. And he answered, yeah, he thought my position came through pretty well. And my position, Aaron, has been consistent, that I have not heard effective or direct answers to the criticisms of the deal. So, for example, what international right will Iran have to enrich uranium when the limitations of this deal expire? Aaron, what will Iran have the sanctioned right to do in terms of enriching uranium at the end of this deal?
We've already conceded that. And let's be clear, 4 countries in the world today, outside of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, Britain, France, Russia, China, and the U.S., all who have deliverable nuclear weapons, 4 additional countries have them. India has the bomb, Pakistan has the bomb, Israel has the bomb, and North Korea has the bomb. Small nations, worried and concerned about their security, in the case of North Korea, with bizarre leaders who have inflated notions of their own importance, or in the case of India and Pakistan, countries that feel an existential threat from one another. these kinds of countries are prone to want to develop the maximum amount of protection for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And in my judgment, Iran is a country driven by a profound sense of insecurity on one hand and a profound sense of grandiosity on the other. That's I know people like that, by the way, Mark. You don't want to get anywhere near them.
Yes.
People who are insecure and people who feel entitled at the same time. The worst possible combination in a human being, and it's a terrible combination in a nation. And frankly, I think the Iranians are poster children for that mentality. At least the regime is. The regime is. So, in my judgment, and I'll say this categorically, if Iran, a decade from now, wants to position itself to be one screwdriver's turn away, figuratively speaking, from producing enough fissile material for one weapon, and then to go on to miniaturize the warhead and then to find a way to deliver it, in my judgment, it will be in a position to do so.
Mm-hmm.
I do not believe, and that includes military action, that we will be able to stop it. And that is why, and if you look at the Iranian behavior, you have to, Donald Trump says the Persians, he calls them, the Iranians are the greatest negotiators in the world. The reality is that think about what the Iranians have done. Just detach yourself from all the arguments and the debates. In exchange for a nuclear weapon they don't even have.
Yes.
And if you believe our own intelligence assessments, they haven't even made a decision to develop. In exchange for this kabuki nuclear weapon,
yes,
they have managed to gain billions of dollars in sanctions relief, to hang an open for business sign in Tehran, to maintain a large and impressive nuclear infrastructure, to pocket a right that we've conceded, that is to say the right to enrich. And at the end of the deal, should they choose to weaponize, they will maintain the capacity to do so. I think, frankly, that's one that you could argue that's the deal of the century.
Right.
And if they were patient strategically, and if the regime doesn't change, and if Iran doesn't evolve into a different kind of place, I mean, after all, they execute other than the Chinese, they execute more people, I think, than any other country in the world. They're a repressive, ideological, authoritarian regime. They're holding 3 Americans we know about, and they have one information on a 4th for sure. They're a serial human rights abuser. They support the murderous Bashar Assad and Hezbollah and pro-Iraqi or Iraqi Shia militias, and they supply limited support to the Houthis in Yemen. I mean, if they don't evolve and they simply wait, and remember, Mark, I measured my life in terms of administrations, 4 to 8 year increments.
Yes.
The region measures time in a decade, maybe a generation. So, I come back to the reality. There are certain limitations to American control and power, and Iran may be one of them.
Okay. I want to sneak in one more question before I
Sure.
ask you to talk about Syria. Just one more question.
Love the show. It's a terrific show.
Okay. Aaron, I typically hear people who support this deal argue that this deal is not meant to prevent Iran from ever getting a nuclear weapon, but will delay the inevitable for some 15 years, give or take, and who knows what can happen in those 15 years. But the president has said the deal will prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, his words, in perpetuity. You don't seem to believe that's an accurate statement, do you?
I don't. And frankly, if he said it, I think he probably regrets he said it. I mean, John Kerry once talked about forever inspections, that these inspections will last forever. Well, as we know, what lasts forever? So no, I think the administration, frankly, and I don't want to trivialize any of this accomplishment, because to get anything done in the Middle East is really, really hard. But there's a real danger that they oversell this. It is not a peace treaty. It is not an accord that provides assurances and guarantees that the Iranians will be forever prevented from acquiring a weapon. It is an arms control agreement with limited objectives for a limited period of time.
Okay, but it's
And
not presented that way.
We
It's
just
not.
need to understand that.
I understand. By the way, I could talk about this the entire, but I want to get the other issue in, because
Yes.
the other big story of the news is this mass migration of millions of people, mostly Muslims, seeking asylum from the horrors of the war in Syria and I guess Iraq, especially now into Europe. But people are concerned who will come to America. And in Israel, Aaron, the lines of refugees streaming across borders has caused a debate in Israel over whether Israel has a responsibility to take in any significant number of refugees. Many Israelis are arguing that the experience of the Shoah places an obligation on Jews not to close the doors on another escaping carnage. Other Israelis argue there's no honest analogy between the war in Syria and the Holocaust, and both Prime Minister Netanyahu and Yair Lapid, different perspectives, have both said they fear that jihadists will use this human tragedy as a way of sending terrorists in and infiltrating Israel. Aaron, what would you say to the American people and the Jewish community about what our responsibility is and how we should now respond to this obvious human tragedy?
Well, I'm not, the Israelis, look, the policies of the Israeli government are hardly perfect. I dealt with Benjamin Netanyahu in his first term. I've seen him occasionally during his second. He is a manifestation and a representation of a clear drift among the Israeli public, probably since the year 2000, toward the right. All right, and Benjamin Netanyahu has a view of the world, and it's not a terribly uplifting view. All right. At the same time, the Israelis during the Syrian crisis have done quite a lot with respect to Syrian Druze and treating Syrian women.
Absolutely.
I can't sit here living in Chevy Chase, even though my first identity, other than being a human being, is as an American. I'm also a proud member of the Jewish community in this country. But I can't sit here at Chevy Chase Circle and either moralize that the Israelis aren't doing enough, or somehow arguing that as Jews we don't have a moral responsibility to look and do everything we can to alleviate the suffering of others. I refuse to be drawn into this debate about what the Israelis should or shouldn't do. I think we here, since we have a tradition of immigration, and immigration on balance has been an incredible source of this country's strength. I mean, I would like to see us consider taking more than the 10,000 additional refugees that the U.S. has committed itself to taking. That's a small amount given the European sensibilities and responsibilities, even with all the downsides that several European countries, including the Germans, who are willing to take so many, have noted. But I'm not going to sit here in judgment of Israel. It's a tiny country in a very dangerous neighborhood with a very dark past. And frankly,
Are you worried?
It would be nice if Israel, by example,
I understand,
would stand up and say, we agree to take a limited number of Syrian refugees. But again, I never forget this, Mark. Where you stand on any issue is a function of where you sit. And I just sit in a very different place. I'm not an Israeli. I don't face existential problems and crises. And I have to be, and I'm humbled and respectful of that. And I worry, and I didn't get into an argument and a debate with other Americans and American Jews who are much more critical of the Israelis. But I think we sometimes forget that where you stand has a lot to do with where you sit, and we really need to always remember where the Israelis sit, particularly these days.
You are fabulous, by the way. I wish all of us can learn from that simple perspective you've just offered us. Listen, Aaron, I have you on the phone, and you wrote this book, The End of Greatness, Why America Can't Have and Doesn't Want Another Great President. So you've seen presidential elections. So I just have to ask you,
yes,
as you look at the Donald Trump phenomenon And I'm not asking you, do you like him, you don't like him? I don't care which candidate you like or don't like. That's not my question.
Yes.
My question is, as someone who has studied how Americans elect presidents, what do you say the phenomenon is that Donald Trump, out of nowhere, because no one thought he would go anywhere or have any chance or ever have 30% approval. What does it say to you about America today that Donald Trump is resonating the way he is?
Well, there's the narrow view of this, which is that he is completely unscripted. He has incredible charisma. He is a candidate that has had more media training and more television experience, I think. Well, there's no question. He's had more media and television experience than any other presidential candidate in recent memory. He's anti-establishment. And I think that, many Americans, he filled up a stadium in Dallas, Texas.
Yes, he did.
People. The question to ask is not that, it's impressive he did that. The question that you have to ask yourselves is how many of those people who showed up to see him will actually participate in the election. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe
You're
Donald
right.
Trump, like Barack Obama, will create new voters.
Yes.
I don't know. So that's the narrow answer. But the more, and again, I know you're going to find this, some people will find what I'm about to say completely outrageous. But I take great pride in the fact that this system of governance still allows individuals, and I would identify two who came literally from nowhere over the last decade, both Barack Obama, one-term senator, and even Sarah Palin, who emerged within the same so-called political time as Obama. This system still allows individuals, by virtue of their own charisma, personality, the means that they've acquired, to play a role in the national debate. And frankly, I would argue on balance, I do not represent the views of those political elites who have been completely dismissive and who consider Donald Trump simply an illegitimate manifestation and representation of the worst kind of politics. I don't agree with that. I really do believe, for better or for worse, and I would argue it's one of our more extraordinary capacities, that this nation was founded on the basis of an idea that individuals count. And the fact is, still in America, you can emerge from the margins when you would least expect it to make a rather large dent on the political stage. And I think in part, both the narrow explanation, he's anti-establishment, great media, and essentially unscripted, has to be attached to the other perspective, and that is we have a system that allows individuals through merit, through their own accomplishment, to rise and to make contributions. So frankly, I'm watching this with great fascination.
I am too.
And very little derision and contempt.
Aaron, I love you so much, and every time I am with you and I say something nice to you, it embarrasses you. I don't mean to. But you should understand what an enormous contribution you've made on the American scene, not only in the halls of government, but with your writing and your work at the Woodrow Wilson International Center. It is always an honor to have you on. I am going to chase you. I will sit down with you when you have time. And again, I wish you the happiest and healthiest of years, you and your family, and we'll see each other often.
Thanks so much, Mark, and shout out to you. And I have to say that I wish my mother were alive to hear what you just said.
Thank you very much, Aaron.
Truly.
Thank you.
Be well, take care, until next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Aaron David Miller of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. My thanks to Sloan Copeland, our director, Serge Goldberg, production coordinator, Dara Golub, associate director of JBS, and to our producer for this edition of In the News, Kara Lilienthal. Again, until the next time, I'm Mark Golub, but Shana Tova Umituka, a sweet, good new year. Be well, my friends.